Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. Israel is about to release 800 terror suspects in exchange for 40 hostages that Hamas is still holding. Our foreign affairs expert Lisa Daftari will have the details. The Canadian Taxpayers Federation is raising the red flag as the Trudeau government wants to bring forth legislation to change our election date. And the mayor of Medicine Hat has had her salary slashed in half. We will explain why.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. The Trudeau government wants to pass legislation moving the date of our next federal election. Now, instead of October the 20th, 2025, it would be October 27th or a week later. Some say the reason is that it's by moving the date by 7 days, 80 more MPs would qualify for their pensions at the expense of the Canadian taxpayer. Now, to chat about this in more detail is the Federal Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, Franco Terrazzano, joins us once again from Ottawa. Franco, how much more will this cost the average Canadian taxpayer?
And the pension cost for all of those MPs over the lifetime is about $120 million. And look, it's not likely that all of those 80 MPs are going to lose in the next election, but if even half of those MPs lose the next election, I mean, this change, moving back the election 1 week, will cost taxpayers tens of millions of dollars. Now, the federal government is claiming that they're moving the election back a week because of a religious holiday. But I mean, just ask any Canadian on the street, and I think most Canadians would say, well, then why don't you just have the election a week early? So it really looks like the government is moving the election back by a week so more MPs can take that generous taxpayer-funded pension. And hey, look, if politicians don't want to look shady, then they should stop doing shady stuff like this.
So, Franco, we ran the numbers. It would be 32 Conservative MPs, followed by 22 Liberal MPs, 20 from the Bloc, and 6 NDP MPs. MPs qualify for a pension after about 6 years of service. So how much of a pension are we talking about per person here?
Well, okay, so the starting annual pension ranges between $32,000 a year and $49,000 a year. Now, that just depends on what roles they had as they're being an MP. But let me just illustrate how lucrative these taxpayer-funded pensions are. So an MP could serve for just 6 years and then get a lifetime pension of more than $2 million.
Now, your group, the CTF, is calling for reforms to the MP pension plan, which includes ending severance and the transition allowance. Now, you're also calling for the MP pay raise to be nixed on April the 1st. Now, Franco, do you think this will just fall on deaf ears?
Well, we're going to keep banging the drum. We're going to keep up the pressure because especially that April 1 pay raise, like how tone deaf could these members of parliament be? Because on the very same day that they raise our taxes, they're also going to be stuffing more money into their pockets, right? Canadians are going to be paying a higher carbon tax on April 1, and members of parliament are going to be giving themselves another pay raise. Completely tone deaf.
Thanks so much for your time today, Franco. That was Franco Terrazzano, Federal Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, joining us from Ottawa. Medicine Hat City Council has slashed the pay and powers of their mayor, Lindsay Clark. Officials say she breached the code of conduct by failing to treat their city manager, Ann Mitchell, with courtesy, dignity, and respect. At a special meeting late last week, Council stripped Clark of many of her powers and cut her salary in half as a result of a tense exchange with City Manager Mitchell back in August. Now, outside of the 50% pay cut, Council imposed other sanctions, including a letter of reprimand and requests for an apology, along with a suspension of Clark's duties under the Municipal Government Act. Mayor Clark will also no longer be the official spokesperson at Medicine Hat City Council.
Following the investigation undertaken by Council, we have concluded that you have breached the City's Code of Conduct, Bylaw 4492, by failing to treat the City Manager with courtesy, dignity, and respect during an exchange at the August 23rd, 2023 Council meeting. As you know, Council was fully aware of the plans of the City reorganization, as Council had had many updates from the City Manager throughout 2023, including an email and an accompanying video about the new department names and managing directors. And it was received by all of Council on June the 28th of 2023, well in advance of our August 21st, 2023 Council meeting. We are all profoundly disappointed in your actions. The city has a duty to provide a safe and respectful workplace for its employees, including our city manager. Council will not tolerate any behavior contrary to our code of conduct that undermines our ability to meet that critical requirement.
Now, Mayor Clark took to her Facebook page expressing her disappointment. In it, she said, quote, "I ran on a platform of change for the citizens of Medicine Hat who were concerned about administrative overreach and poor governance at City Hall. I stand by those principles. I fundamentally disagree with the decision of Council. I find Council's sanction shocking and absolutely disproportionate. I'm reviewing my legal options." The Alberta government offered an update as how it plans to address a potential drought we may see in the province this year. Government officials say $75 million has been invested in the Water Innovation Program, supporting 101 completed projects. They say altogether there are around 166 projects costing around $256 million. They say the investments will accelerate new technology to help deliver safe and secure drinking water to a number of communities.
We need to use water more efficiently so that communities and businesses alike can grow and thrive. We're doing more than any government in Alberta's history to maximize our province's water supply in the months and years to come. The largest water sharing agreements in Alberta's 118-year history are right now underway. Conservation plans are being put in place for the spring, summer, and fall and beyond. And millions are being invested on restoring watersheds and creating new wetlands in southern Alberta and, of course, across the province.
The City of Lethbridge is taking the initiative to provide our local hockey team with a very special life-saving kit. It's the first for a hockey arena. As BCN's Jeanette Rocher explains now, she tells us what this kit is all about and how it can save lives. Now, word of caution, this story may contain content that some may find disturbing.
5 minutes. That's how quickly it can take to bleed to death following a severe injury. And no one knows this better than those who play the fastest game around, where anything can happen in a split second.
It's a fast game, and with the sharp blades on our skates, anything can happen.
Last October, the hockey community and the world were shaken when American hockey player Adam Johnson, who was playing for the Nottingham Panthers, bled to death just minutes after being slashed in the throat by another player's skate blade during a televised game in Europe. It was this incident that prompted Lethbridge anesthesiologist Dr. Kirsten Derdahl to approach the city about providing the NMAC Center and the Lethbridge Hurricanes with special life-saving tools. Enter the Stop the Bleed initiative.
I started thinking about hockey arenas and some of the injuries that we can see, particularly bad lacerations around areas that might bleed, like arterial bleeds. So I approached the city and they were so fantastic and saying, I think that this would be a great initiative. Let's get this going.
Stop the Bleed is a public awareness campaign across Canada and the U.S. that initially stemmed from the tragic school shooting at Sandy Hook Elementary in 2012.
And it involves enhanced training, medication, and treatment.
In the setting of a major bleed, minutes count.
Which is why the Stop the Bleed kit includes a tourniquet and hemostatic dressing, which is a specialized medicated gauze.
The exciting thing about the medication that we use, it actually enhances clotting factors by 10 times. It's actually, interestingly enough, made up from seashells. And they crush the seashells and somehow it has wonderful clotting capabilities.
With a little bit of training and education, apply pressure, put the dressing, put a tourniquet on, right? 3 kind of simple steps.
NMAC Center will be getting the city's first kit, with more kits planned for other local rinks and the post-secondary institutions, with the hope that other communities will also roll them out at hockey rinks.
It could happen to anybody, so anybody needs to, have the ability to work with, the new machine that we have here now, and as well as cuts with stopping the bleed and understanding, how to handle from all facets of CPR or, a bad gash on somewhere that can be critical for the body to sustain life.
For Bridge City News, I'm Jeanette Rocher.
Lethbridge police are in need of our help. They're asking for witnesses to come forward who may have seen a hit and run on Sunday afternoon. Police say they responded to a call at 1:16 in the afternoon about a woman and her dog being hit. They say the collision occurred in the area of 20th Avenue and Palm Road South. They say a 33-year-old woman and her Yorkie Terrier were hit by a dark-colored vehicle that failed to stop. Now, fortunately, the woman was not seriously injured, but the dog sadly was killed. Police canvassed the area, video surveillance, looking for some of it, and witnesses, but so far they've come up empty. If you can help police with their investigation, you're asked to call them right away at 403-328-4444. The Alberta Serious Incident Response Team has called in to investigate a Calgary shooting which left a man dead. On March 14th at 3 p.m., Calgary Police Tactical Team approached a home in the community of Pembroke Meadows in the city's southeast with a search warrant. Police told the occupants to leave the residence. Now, 4 of them did, but 1 man remained inside. Around 3:43 p.m., the man began firing shots at police. Fortunately, no one was injured. After 30 hours of negotiating with the man, to no avail, police fired tear gas into the home. The man still did not come out, but unloaded more rounds from the residence and struck a couple of armored vehicles. The man then went to the back of the home, shooting once again. That's when Calgary police and RCMP officers fired back and struck the man. He was declared dead at the scene. Now, police found a shotgun with ammunition along with other loaded firearms at the scene. ACERT's investigation will examine the uses of force during the altercation with the suspect. Well, we saw quite a bit of snow over the weekend here in Lethbridge. Friends were actually measuring their patio furniture and measured about 30 centimeters or 12 inches of the white stuff. Jeanette Rocher is now with an early look at the forecast. Jeanette, when it comes to snow here in southwestern Alberta, we're not out of the woods just yet?
Not quite yet, because, Hal, it does look like we could see a few more flurries this evening and then another 30% chance tomorrow. But there is some positive news in all of this, and that is that the mercury is going to be rising above freezing beginning tomorrow, Tuesday. So look at that right there, a high of 2 degrees. First time in probably about a week's time that we've seen those rise into the pluses. And you know what? It's going to get just even that much warmer. And I'll be back later in the show to tell you how warm it's going to get. And here's a hint, it's going to be above seasonal.
Looking forward to the warmer temperatures. Thanks so much, Jeanette. The Republican candidate for the U.S. presidency, Donald Trump, says he'll post a bond of $175 million within the next 10 days as he appeals a judgment of $454 million against him. A New York appeals court made the announcement saying it would accept a smaller bond, which helps the former president potentially stave off a looming financial disaster.
So I greatly respect the decision of the appellate division, and I'll post either $175 million in cash or bonds or security or whatever is necessary very quickly within the 10 days. And I thank the appellate division for acting quickly. But Judge Engoron is a disgrace to this country, and this should not be allowed to happen. Thank you very much.
Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly says Canada will be airlifting vulnerable Canadians out of Haiti to the Dominican Republic as conditions on the island continue to worsen. She says close to 3,000 registered Canadians are still in the country, which has been overrun by gangs and gang violence.
We will be facilitating the travel of the most vulnerable Canadians in Haiti to the Dominican Republic. At present, the Dominican Republic has strict eligibility requirements for all those entering the country. Only Canadian citizens who have a valid Canadian passport will be eligible for this assisted departure. The same requirements applies to our allies and our partners, including the U.S. This is why we are working for other Canadian and family members, as well as permanent residents and their family members, to be able to have access to other types of assisted departure options.
Earlier this month, Canada airlifted most of its diplomats from its embassy in Port-au-Prince by helicopter to the Dominican. They continue to work remotely due to the volatility of the situation in Haiti. Israel is about to release 800 Palestinian prisoners in exchange for 40 hostages that Hamas has been holding since the October 7th terrorist attack in southern Israel. Our foreign affairs expert Lisa Daftari says many of the prisoners the Jewish state is about to release are hardcore criminals and terrorists.
Now, Israel is caught in a very, very difficult situation here because obviously they want those civilians to come back home and go to their families and try to live a normal life after being in captivity for so long. But at the same time, Imagine all the potential terror there is to come that will be unleashed on Israel because of all these terrorists being released who belong in prison. So it's a very difficult decision. I know that Israel is under a lot of pressure from the international community as well, from Qatar, from the United States, who are involved in these talks, pressuring Israel to take the deal. And of course, Israel agreed first and was waiting for Hamas to even see if they want to consider this deal, even though it is very lopsided in their favor. So this is the news out of Israel today.
Foreign Affairs expert Lisa Daftari will also talk about the new attack drone that Iran has been showing off at a military trade show in Qatar. She'll have details coming up after business news. Meanwhile, dozens of Palestinians from northern Gaza traveled south on Monday, crossing Wadi Gaza and into the central belt of the war-ravaged enclave.
احنا طالعين من الجوع وفيش مكان، البيت اللي انا كنت متأجرة انقصف الحمد لله. نجينا يعني بصعوبة بموت نجينا. وقعدنا نتشرد من مكان لمكان، لكن كل الأماكن للأسف كلها ما فيش فيها أمان.
The UN Security Council voted on Monday to pass a resolution demanding an immediate humanitarian ceasefire in Gaza during the Muslim holy month of Ramadan.
The result of the voting is as follows: 14 votes in favor, 0 vote against, 1 abstention. The draft resolution has been adopted as Resolution 2728, 2024.
Italy is following in the footsteps of France in beefing up national security following the attack on a Russian concert hall, which left 143 people dead. The Islamic State group claimed responsibility for the attack. Russian police have arrested 11, including 4 gunmen, they say, who were involved. Italy's National Security Council is increasing security during Holy Week this week, leading up to Easter this weekend. France increased its security alert to the highest level with the Paris Olympics just around the corner. Without adequate ammunition stockpiles, the Ukrainian military says it can now only fire at precise targets while facing a torrent of Russian artillery strikes. The war between Russia and Ukraine has now passed the 2-year mark.
Складна ситуація на фронті. Не вистачає нам боєприпасів. Були б боєприпаси, стало б легше для піхоти. А так важко.
Praying that war comes to an end very soon. Well, we've been enjoying quite a bit of snow here in Lethbridge over the past few days, and more of the white stuff is on the way. Full weather details are on deck. You know, you could have almost skied into work today here in Lethbridge with your cross-country skis, thanks to all of the snow we've received lately. Jeanette Rocher is now with all of the weather details. Jeanette, those who have been praying for more moisture have had their prayers answered here in southwestern Alberta?
Yeah, well, that's for sure, because there sure has been a lot of it. In fact, in the past week, we have seen close to 40 centimeters, and it looks like we could see a few more flurries this evening and even into Tuesday, a 30% chance. But here's the good news, which I promised before. We're seeing plus temperatures, so finally that mercury rising above freezing. And as we get into Wednesday and Thursday, high of 9 degrees, which puts us above seasonal. So high for this time of year is 8 degrees. We're going to be sitting at 9 by midweek. And then back down to 0 on Friday with some cloudy periods there. I should mention as well, Thursday evening, we could see a little bit more moisture as well in the form of either flurries or showers overnight. And then as we get into Friday, clouds. And then for the weekend, we're seeing plus temperatures. We're going from 1 and then jumping all the way up to 11 degrees on a Sunday with clear skies. So it should be a lovely day on Sunday. So as mentioned, average high for this time of year, 8 degrees, average low, -5. 20 was our high temperature that happened back in 1999. And in 1955, we were sitting at a chilly -27. 7:22, that's when the sun rose this morning. Sunset this evening at 7:54. We're looking at 12 hours, 32 minutes of daylight. 30% chance of showers in Victoria tomorrow, looking at 13 degrees for a high, 20K wind, 40K though as we look at the Juan de Fuca Strait there. 12 degrees for a high in Vancouver, 70% chance of showers earlier in the day, and then a mix of sun and cloud as we we get closer to the evening there. Edmonton sitting at 4 degrees tomorrow, 30% chance of flurries, and we're seeing a 30% chance of showers or flurries tomorrow in Calgary with a high of 3 degrees. As we get into the rest of the prairies, looking at Saskatoon, high of -4 rather, and mainly clear skies there. Clear skies as well expected in Regina, still sitting in those minuses there, -3 for a high, and -7 in Winnipeg with light periods of snow. Also Winnipeg seeing 30 to 50K winds. Same thing for Toronto, 30 to 50K winds tomorrow. Also seeing a chance of showers there, 9 degrees for a high. Ottawa, 13 for a high and 12 expected high tomorrow in Montreal with a mix of sun and cloud. As we get into Atlantic Canada, we are seeing a lot more precipitation and more showers, in fact. So we're seeing chance of showers, and it could be mixed with a risk of freezing rain there in Fredericton, 3 for a high there. Halifax sitting at 3 degrees, 5 millimeters of rain expected there, 30% chance of showers in Charlottetown, 4 for a high, and high of 2 degrees in St. John's with beautiful sunny skies. In fact, it's going to feel even warmer the further inland you go, more like 6 degrees there. So there you have it. That is your forecast.
Not only are the prices of fruits and vegetables rising, but so is the price of cocoa. Officials with Farm Credit Canada say bad weather and disease in West Africa are responsible for the huge spike in cocoa prices. According to Stats Canada, the price of confectionery items rose more than 9% between January of 2023 and January of this year. That compared with overall inflation for food purchased from stores of 3.4%. Nissan has announced plans to expand its electric vehicle lineup, develop more powerful batteries, and cut production costs. Officials at the Japanese-based automaker say the plan to move to more EVs will lead to greater sales by the year 2030. They say they will lower EV costs to the point that they'll be about the same as gasoline engine models. The target over the next 6 years is to increase sales by 1 million vehicles. Nissan plans to launch 34 electrified models from now until 2030 so that EVs will account for around 40% of the market share. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was down 41 points on the day to finish at 21,942. The Dow was down 162 points to 39,313. The S&P 500 was down 15 on the day to 5218, and the Nasdaq was down 44 points to 16,384. West Texas Intermediate Oil was up $1.32 to $81.95 US per barrel. Natural gas was down 4 cents to $1.62 US. Gold was up $6.39 on the day to $21.7184 US an ounce, and silver was up a cent to $24.68 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $8.30 per bushel, barley's at $6.42, canola's at $14.63, and corn is at $7.52 per bushel. Live cattle April contract was down $1.30 to $186.20. Feeder cattle were down 50 cents to $249.45, and lean hogs were up 58 cents for the April contract at $85.15. The Canadian dollar was up slightly over the past 24 hours to 73.61 US. Recapping one of our top stories, Medicine Hat City Council has slashed the pay and powers of their mayor, Lindsay Clark. Officials say she breached the code of conduct by failing to treat their city manager, Ann Mitchell, with courtesy, dignity, and respect. At a special meeting late last week, Council stripped Clark of many of her powers and cut her salary in half as a result of a tense exchange with City Manager Mitchell back in August. Outside of the 50% pay cut, Council imposed other sanctions, including a letter of reprimand and request for an apology, along with the suspension of Clark's duties under the Government Municipal Act. Clark says she disagrees with Council's decision and is seeking legal counsel. It appears as though Israel is about to exchange 800 Palestinian prisoners for just 40 hostages that Hamas is still holding. Our foreign affairs expert Lisa Daftari will have more details for us momentarily. Listen, when you see news happening in your community, be sure to drop us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. Also, be sure to visit our website anytime to check out a number of local stories and interviews. Israel has agreed to let a whole lot of prisoners go who've been labeled as terrorists in exchange for about 40 hostages still being held by Hamas. Now, to chat about this in more detail is our foreign affairs expert, Lisa Daftari, who joins us once again from Los Angeles at the Foreign Desk. Lisa, how many potential terror prisoners are we talking about that Israel is about to release?
So this is a lopsided deal of 800 for 40 hostages.
Wow.
So among these 800, we have terrorists, we have murderers, obviously convicted of crimes, but being released for 40 innocent civilians, many of whom are above 80 years old. Women and children still in that mix. We're not sure who's going to be released just yet, but this is the name of the game. This is why terrorists play the game of taking hostages so that they can release their terrorists out of Israeli prisons. This is exactly what they had intended to do. Now, Israel is caught in a very, very difficult situation here because obviously they want those civilians to come back home and go to their families and try to live a normal life after being in captivity for so long. But at the same time, imagine all the potential terror there is to come that will be unleashed on Israel because of all these terrorists being released who belong in prison. So it's a very difficult decision. I know that Israel is under a lot of pressure from the international community as well, from Qatar, from the United States, who are involved in these talks, pressuring Israel to take the deal. And of course, Israel agreed first and was waiting for Hamas to even see if they want to consider this deal, even though it is very lopsided in their favor. So this is the news out of Israel today.
Yeah, let's talk more about the point that you brought up earlier. Won't a lot of these prisoners being released just go back and fight for Hamas against Israel, or perhaps even make their way to Lebanon to fight for Hezbollah?
Absolutely, and that has been the history of this repeated pattern. Just this October 7th attack that we recently had, one of the masterminds was actually released in a previous exchange, similar to the one that we're talking about today. So it's again very difficult because Israel has learned its lesson, so to speak, but cannot really act upon it because when you have civilians, when you have these innocent, hostages that we're talking about, they have to do whatever they can to bring them home. But again, how many lives will be lost in the future because of those terrorists that are being released? That's really the very difficult situation that Israel finds itself in, and that they have made this decision to finally try to bring them home after all these months.
That's such a high number, 800 to 40. Why not 40 for 40 or even 100 for 40?
Right, exactly. And I know that they have tried. They have tried everything. And I know when people are out on the streets, obviously these are all individuals who couldn't even place Gaza or Israel on the map, but many of them are yelling ceasefire. Even members of Congress, as you know, the Squad, yelling ceasefire now. If you saw them at the State of the Union, they were carrying signs that said ceasefire now. Well, Hamas has been the one to turn down so many different offers for various hostage swaps for the prisoners and ceasefire proposals. So it has always been in the hands of Hamas. It has been theirs to reject, and they have rejected many, many times. So again, Israel finds itself in this difficult position to try to bring home the hostages, but yet also is finding itself in a very vulnerable position in terms of security by allowing these hostages to go and to allowing the prisoners rather to be freed. And also think about all these months that these hostages have been in captivity, being raped, being deprived medical attention. Again, babies and elderly. So it's very, very difficult. And of course, there is no real solution to this other than to give them the prisoners that they want, release the terrorists that they want. And Israel feels that this is the agreement that they have to make in order to bring home those innocent hostages.
So, Lisa, the Iran regime, which many people would argue is funding a lot of these proxy wars, was showing off their latest drone at the Qatar military trade show. Named the Gaza, the manufacturer claims this remote-controlled weapon with a 68-foot wingspan has a range of about 1,600 kilometers, 1,000 miles, and can carry, 13 mounted guns or other pieces of artillery.
Right. So imagine this. Iran's regime that was formerly being heavily sanctioned, heavily isolated from the world community and the world economy, is now selling oil from $60 to $90 billion in oil revenue, finding partners like China and Russia, selling weapons to Russia, allowing them to fire them down into Ukraine, and now obviously flexing its muscles all throughout the region. Not only are they funding the Houthis, as we're seeing them in the Red Sea, or Hezbollah in Lebanon, or Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad in the West Bank and Gaza, but also flexing their muscles at these trade shows to say, look at us, we have all this new technology, and yet doubling down on the war between Hamas and Israel by naming this piece of equipment, the Gaza. So really showing where they stand and being bold enough, being rogue enough on the world stage to flex their muscles yet again. The Iran regime just got one message out of the Biden administration from the international community at this moment, and that is that there will be no repercussions until the end of the Biden administration. If they should be reelected, they have another 4 years of this. They're playing out the clock. They're doing everything that they can to really stick it to the West and to really show their might, their development, their technology, and this is just one example of that.
So if Trump is elected, how do you think he'll approach this war?
Well, we saw that Trump was sandwiched between Obama and Biden's Iran policies. And if we're just talking about Iran policy or foreign policy in general, very different. We saw Obama and Biden, very similar policies when it comes to Iran's regime. Appeasement, let's sit down and have a nuclear deal. President Obama actually signed that nuclear deal in 2015, loosened the sanctions, gave them the breathing space because their ideology regarding Iran was that they can be negotiated with, we can normalize relations with them, we can communicate with them, etc. Donald Trump stopped short of calling for regime change. He didn't say that he wanted to actually cause a revolution in Iran, but what he did was put them under what he called his pressure campaign. Pressure campaign was having sanctions that are very targeted and well enforced, isolating Iran's regime from not being able to participate, whether it's in the World Bank or any other global organizations, and really stopping those individuals from coming over, stopping the visas that are going on, and really it worked. We saw that they were they actually were diminished to the point where the Iranian people were able to come out onto the streets in the aftermath of the Mahsa Amini death. That was the 22-year-old Kurdish Iranian girl who was beaten at the hands of the regime because of her hijab, if you recall. That was in September 2 years ago. And then you saw all the protests that surrounded that. Well, that was because of the environment that was ripe for that. The economy had tanked. The Iranian people felt that they had the support of the White House under Trump. They had the support of the UN under Nikki Haley, and that all of that changed. And again, Trump, love him or hate him, with regards to Iran policy, he did do everything that he could to do an about face from the Obama era and showing them that there's a new sheriff in town, that he's going to take things much more seriously when it comes to Iran's regime, when it comes to terrorism. He defunded a lot of the organizations that were giving that Iran's regime was giving money to, including UNRWA and a lot of the Palestinian aid, because he accused them of pay to slay, which is exactly what's going on right now. All of those terrorists who were involved in October 7th will get a hefty stipend for themselves and their family. So I think that there is a huge difference, a discrepancy between these different foreign policies. So come next year, we'll see who's going to take the White House, and that will tell us everything we need to know with regards to our positioning regarding Iran's regime.
Lisa, Russian President Vladimir Putin has blamed the shooting at the Moscow concert, which killed at least 143 people, on Ukraine. Yet ISIS has claimed responsibility. Is there a connection there?
We'll leave it to Putin to use every opportunity to say he's right and this fits his narrative. So if he blames it on Ukraine, well then yes, Ukraine got the message to ISIS to carry out this attack so that they can, look, it's a bit far-fetched, especially because we have ISIS claiming responsibility. On the other hand, we really don't know if it was ISIS. I'll tell you why. ISIS has done this in the past where they have a false flag, right? Oh, this happened, we're going to claim responsibility. But in this case, we have videos, we have, they are claiming responsibility. We have, apparently, Russia says that they have apprehended many that are involved in the planning of all of this. So in this case, I would lean towards saying if ISIS says they did it, they actually did it. And Putin hasn't been the most honest broker throughout his life, particularly in the present moment as he continues his war on Ukraine. So there we have it. Of course, ISIS has resurfaced, and I think if you ask people in the Middle East, is ISIS the biggest threat? No, but right now it is making waves again in places like Afghanistan and Syria, and now here in Russia. So it's important to keep our eyes on the growing threat of ISIS. But again, I will go back to Iran's regime being even a bigger threat of supporting terrorism throughout the region.
And Russian authorities, like you mentioned, they've arrested 11 people in connection with a gun attack, including 4 of the suspected gunmen. And apparently, Lisa, I was reading on Reuters and some other reports as well, that ISIS is targeting a lot of countries which are clamping down on Islam. Are you hearing the same thing?
Yes, so this is, I mean, it makes sense, right? They are the Islamic State. They will go after anybody who, that their goal is to spread their version of Islam. And that is exactly what we saw out of Iran's regime. Their goal after 1979 was to spread their version of Islam, which is why we saw a lot of different proxy wars between states like Saudi Arabia and Iran fighting each other. But now it's become a more common goal to fight Western ideologies, to fight anything that is fighting Islam, and for Islam to take over the globe, whether it's Sunni or Shiite. They're now working together in many instances to make this, to really spread their influences throughout the world.
Lisa, people are still fleeing Haiti as gun violence and gang violence in the Caribbean nation escalates even further, and more than 1,600 U.S. citizens have filed emergency paperwork requesting help evacuating the island. Also, no immediate foreign military aid is expected to arrive in Haiti to help the country's already beleaguered police force.
Right. So, priority right now is the United States is telling everyone to get out. We're seeing a lot of hands being raised for help. 80 of them landed in Miami late last week. I think there will be more of these rescue missions, so to speak, to get the Americans or anyone with U.S. citizenship out of harm's way. The country has gone amok, as you know, if you've been following the reports, gang violence. This is not something that they can get a hold of because the head of the country has been cut and resigned. The prime minister resigned as well, and now we're looking at really no end in sight. So the only thing that the United States is really prioritizing at the moment is getting these individuals out of Haiti.
And something that we discussed before, how much of that gang violence will actually spill over into the Dominican Republic, considering they share the same island?
Right, that's the fear. Not only that, but to end up, taking boats to Florida and getting into the United States. Again, we have so many porous borders. Florida, I'm not so worried about in terms of being porous, in the sense that, DeSantis will fight any kind of violent or unvetted individuals from coming over, and I think that there have been a few boats that have been captured already, and this is just the beginning of it. So to your point, I think there is always spillover, and in this case, because we don't know who that spillover is, are these innocent people who are trying to flee the war, or are these actual terrorists or gang members who are trying to get into the country, whether it's the Dominican first or then to the United States? That's exactly the same fear we have at our southern border, is that yes, there are very many well-intentioned individuals who want to come here for the American dream, but there are also many coming from different countries, men of fighting age, where you don't know what they're coming here for, what their intentions are, or why they're coming through the southern border.
The number of reports surfacing from a number of media outlets, Lisa, that many of the illegal immigrants who stormed the border in El Paso, Texas, knocking over members of the Texas National Guard, have now been processed and released into the United States.
Right. So they can do no harm, right? There's no insurrection when it comes to immigrants. Look, it is very dangerous what's going on right now. The lawlessness that we are allowing is unheard of. Look, first and foremost, I'm a daughter of immigrants to this country, so I believe in legal immigration to allow those who are using the process correctly to come over. But guess what? For those who actually champion immigration and immigration rights, this is actually getting in the way, because the people who are filing and trying to come over legally, their files are on hold because we just cannot absorb the sheer number of individuals trying to get into this country. So those who are cutting the line, so to speak, and coming over in this illegal way, they're risking their own lives. They're risking our lives because we don't know who they are. They can't be properly vetted. The coyotes are taking advantage of them. They're being raped. They're drowning. There's so many risks that are involved in coming over. The children are getting separated from their parents. So they're already going through so many obstacles. And then when they come over, again, we can't vet those individuals. Why are there individuals from Iran's regime in Syria coming over through our southern border? Why are there members of various gangs and drug cartels coming through our border? Why are there Chinese people coming through the border? Again, these individuals need to come through the legal way so that it could be properly processed and vetted, and so that we can allow people who generally truly want to be coming into this country to allow them to come in. We need the workforce. We We welcome those who want to come here for a better life. And again, because we cannot absorb the sheer numbers, this will not end well. How can we absorb these individuals? They will become homeless. They will be unemployed. I mean, the list goes on and on. There is no good ending to this. Whether you're for immigration or you're against immigration, this is across the board a bad idea. And I think by the time the Biden administration wakes up to this, or if they ever want to wake up to this, it's going to be too late.
So let me ask you something. Is the United States still the land flowing with milk and honey?
Well, you know what? In some ways it is. And in some ways, for those who have lived here and continue to live here, if you talk about the price of basic groceries and gas and, inflation and everything else, just, the crime, everything else, this is not the country that my parents came here for. My father came to the country for his education, and then the Iran Revolution happened, and they ended up staying here. So, came here for all the opportunities and all the things that I love about this country is because I see that through my parents' eyes and all the opportunities they had because they were immigrants to this country. But that's not the same sentiment that is shared among the immigrant class right now, coming to this country and not having those opportunities because they just, again, cannot. They're going to cities, getting bussed around, not able to find those opportunities, not able to get the housing that they want or need or can be absorbed. And even if they're being put up in hotels, how long is that going to last? And then you're bankrupting the same city that you want to contribute to and work in and be prosperous in. So it's not a balanced equation. It's not going to work out. And again, there's no way to really stop this from happening. So that is why we're seeing record numbers of immigrants that have come in just in February, and now we're in March. We'll have to see the numbers. But just in February, we had a record number. So we know that is just peaking. And again, if you are somebody who wants to make that move and come through the border, wouldn't you do so before the end of this administration? If there would be an end to this administration, again, we're not sure what's going to happen in that election. But I do think that people are playing out the clock, and they know that this is a free-for-all right now. So they're taking that opportunity.
She's our foreign affairs expert and host of the Foreign Desk, Lisa Daftari. Thanks so much for joining us once again from the City of Angels.
Thank you.
We learned this week that the federal government is open to potentially changing the Emergencies Act. Public Safety Minister Dominic LeBlanc says Ottawa will consider a number of recommendations from the Justice Rouleau report, which came out last year, talking around 22 changes. Now, to chat about this in more detail is Lethbridge MP and Shadow Minister for Canadian Heritage, Rachel Thomas, who joins us here from the Windy City. Rachel, welcome back to BCN.
Hey, Hal, thank you. Nice to be here.
Now, in your opinion, what are some of the recommendations from the Rouleau report that maybe need adopting when it comes to the Emergencies Act?
I think it's first important just to remind ourselves here just for a moment as to what happened here. So the Emergencies Act, of course, was incited by the Prime Minister, and it was his response to what was known as the trucker convoy in Ottawa. And of course, we had truckers from all across the country fill the streets there in the nation's capital. And the reason they did so is because they were against vaccine mandates was one of the big things that they were against. But more importantly, they were against the Prime Minister's divisive politics. He was certainly trying to, stigmatize and divide us as Canadians. And so they were protesting that, and they had every right to do so. The Prime Minister, in a rage of glory, decided that he was going to enact the Emergencies Act. What has been determined now from the federal courts is actually that he moved that act unnecessarily. Now, of course, Trudeau can't accept that ruling, and so he's taking it to be challenged. But nevertheless, that ruling has been made. And so it doesn't surprise me that Minister Dominic LeBlanc then is saying they need more time. They're going to need more time probably for a long time to actually make any changes or implement any of the 56 recommendations. To answer your question directly, Hal, look, the number one recommendation out of that report that should be enacted today, it should not take any further consideration, is he said, point blank, the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms needs to be upheld. That's a no-brainer. Yeah, the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms needed to be upheld from day one and never should have been violated. And so I would start there, and then I would continue implementing a number of his other recommendations.
Rachel, another class action lawsuit has been launched against both the federal and provincial governments on behalf of Albertans who were vaccine injured or who lost their jobs during the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, what are your thoughts when you hear about some civil lawsuits such as this?
Yeah, I think first my heart breaks for those that did suffer a vaccine injury. I've certainly sat in my office with a few of these folks who have suffered because of the vaccine that they took, and it's been proven through medical assessments and documentation. And then, they've applied for assistance from a federal program that was set up in order to respond. And it's been hurdle after hurdle, unfortunately. There's been so many gatekeepers in the way of receiving the payout that is due to them, the medications that they should be given, the therapies that they should have access to. And so I'm trying to help these folks be able to access those things that they rightly deserve. So it doesn't surprise me that this case has come forward. I think people have suffered a tremendous amount, and they have every right to bring a civil case like this to the courts. And I look forward to watching the process unfold.
Now, we received more insight into the Winnipeg lab story, Rachel, but once again, it appears as though the Trudeau government, assisted by the NDP, appears to be stopping us from finding out more. Now, some of the recent information released is that one of the two fired scientists, Dr. Key, was doing some work to benefit China. Now, that included working with the Wuhan Institute of Virology, transferring various viruses, including Ebola. Your thoughts?
Oh, yeah. So we have evidence that there were significant security breaches starting in 2018 from these two scientists who were working on behalf of, the PRC. And not only transferring, important information, top secret information, but also, incredibly dangerous pathogens. And so, of course, this is a massive security breach and raises significant questions pertaining to our country's ability to maintain security and sovereignty. And obviously, this is a huge failure by the Liberal government. And so it's no wonder why Mr. Trudeau stood in our way every single time we took initiative to ask for documents and seek further information on this. I mean, Trudeau went to great lengths, including taking the Speaker of the House of Commons to court to try to prevent the release of these documents. We now have over 600 pages of incredibly condemning documentation with regard to what has happened in this lab and the illegal transfer of information. And it's incredibly startling. And I think Canadians certainly deserve all of the answers. So we will continue as Conservatives to push for that and try our best to get to the bottom of what happened here. And I think most importantly, going forward under Conservative government, we would make sure that there is greater security brought to this lab and to our country as a whole, and make sure that this doesn't happen in the future.
It appears as though Canadians are really taking notice of some of these serious issues, Rachel. The latest polls show that the Trudeau Liberals are around 17 points behind your party, the Pierre Poilievre Conservatives. But how can you really maintain that momentum? An election is not expected until the fall of 2025.
Yeah, it's a good question, Hal. I think it's I think in some ways it's simple in the sense that this is truly who we are. This is us as Conservatives living our values, the things that matter most to us, because we believe that they matter most to Canadians. And so when we say we're going to axe the carbon tax, we're going to build the homes, we're going to fix the budget, we're going to stop the crime, we mean it. We mean it. There is no other message that is more important than that. Because these are the four things that we're hearing from Canadians as their priorities, and therefore they are our priorities. And so to continue going forward on that message and to continue building momentum on behalf of Canadians and standing up for their needs, I don't believe is a problem for us at all, because that is what it is to lead. That is what it is to form government. It's to be on the side of the working people.
Now let's talk about that carbon tax for just a moment here, Rachel. It's going up April 1st by around 23%. That'll make life so much harder for so many of us who use natural gas to heat our homes and filling up our vehicles. Now, we do receive rebates, but oftentimes the rebates are simply not enough. Now, your leader, Pierre Poilievre, keeps blasting the Prime Minister, saying, like you said, he needs to axe the tax, but Why isn't the message getting through? Cannot Trudeau see how so many Canadians are struggling right now?
Unfortunately, Hal, I think the message is getting through in the sense that the Prime Minister knows Canadians don't like the carbon tax. It's why he paid costly consultants to help him do a rebrand. He knows Canadians hate it. And so he tried to come up with some new spiffy name in hopes that he could perhaps, get Canadians on side. The fact of the matter is they're not. Canadians are paying through the roof when it comes to the carbon tax, whether it's on gas or groceries or home heating, and they're sick of it. Quite frankly, they can't afford it. Month over month, we saw 2 million people on average visit food banks across this country during 2023. In 2024, we're expecting upwards of 3 million people as a monthly average to go to food banks. I mean, this is not the Canada we know. This is supposed to be a place of opportunity and being able to further oneself. And instead, due to Trudeau's punitive policies, people are, 2 steps back rather than 2 steps ahead. That's not okay.
Now, MPs, as you know, are in line for another pay raise on April the 1st. But Rachel, is this really necessary, especially with so many Canadians hurting right now? Have you and your party maybe questioned the PM on this? The timing is a little off, don't you think?
That's a fair question, Hal. I think what you're referring to is on April 1st, there's an automatic legislated raise of 2% for all elected officials within the House of Commons. This is something that Prime Minister Stephen Harper froze in 2008. He enacted legislation that would not allow us to receive those raises. It was Trudeau's first step when he became Prime Minister to reenact that in 2015. So at the end of the day, it is legislated. I've indicated that I would rather not receive it. Unfortunately, I've been told by the HR department that I'm not allowed to refuse. It's something that is legislated and therefore automatic. All that to say, I think you're right, Hal. Canadians are suffering. They're certainly finding it very difficult to make ends meet. And I do believe that as leaders of this country, it is up to us to go first and to make sure that we're in step with them. And so I would be in favor of seeing that frozen.
You know what, here's a thought. How about take the extra money that the MPs are going to make from that legislative increase and put it towards food banks across the country and support our food banks? Rachel, as you know, there's an election this fall coming up in the United States. Donald Trump is the last remaining strong Republican candidate, with Nikki Haley suspending her campaign. Now, Trump has been called a protectionist, America first in the past, but you know what? U.S. President Joe Biden hasn't been much better. How would your party handle things differently should you form government in 2025 when it comes to dealing with protectionist presidents affecting trade between Canada and the United States and our jobs?
Great question. I think the first thing that comes to mind actually is, given that Prime Minister Brian Mulroney just passed away not too long ago, he comes to mind. In 1989, he is the one who achieved a free trade agreement with the United States of America. And the way that he went about that was through relationship building and knowing that there was a benefit for both countries. And of course, we know that free trade agreement has served Canada incredibly well. It would be our hope as Conservatives to continue to protect that relationship, to continue to advance that relationship. And to that end, we already have members of Parliament who are going to Washington on a regular basis in order to build that bridge and make sure that when we form government, we're ready to hit the road running.
Now, the Trudeau government is giving the CBC $1.4 billion, an increase in funding, despite executives insisting that they received a request to cut the public broadcaster's budget. Now, this is one of the reasons why they announced they were laying off around 10% of their workforce. So with the extra funding, do you think that means more jobs will be saved and executives will be receiving their bonuses thanks to the Canadian taxpayer?
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't know that it's going to result in more jobs being saved, but it is perhaps going to result in more big bonuses being given to the top executives. I think Catherine Tate has made it really clear that her intent is to cut 800 jobs. She made that announcement just before Christmas, even before she knew what the final budget line would be. And then when she came to committee in at the end of January, we asked her if she herself felt she deserved a bonus. And her answer was, quote, absolutely yes, end quote. And so here's someone who, has led the CBC during one of its most disastrous points in history, and yet believes that she deserves this supposed performance bonus. She goes on to contend for, her executive team and believes that they deserve the same. So this is not someone who is interested in saving jobs. This is someone who is interested in saving her job and saving bonuses for those that are at the top.
Now, Rachel, you've mentioned on social media in the past that your party wants to get to the bottom of the, quote, Arrive scam scandal, an app that was supposed to cost $80,000 for Canadian taxpayers ballooned up to over $60 million. How is that going right now?
Yeah, again, I appreciate the question. Look, during COVID, the government decided to create an app known as Arrive Can. We now call it the Arrive Scam. The reason being is because the Prime Minister promised Canadians that it would only cost $80,000. However, a recent Auditor General report shows that it cost at least $60 million. Now, the reason we don't know the exact cost is because actually the Auditor General wasn't able to find paperwork for a whole lot of these contracts. And so what we know is that it was at least 60 million, but it could have been even more. And what we also know based on the Auditor General's report is really it was a ton of money being given out to friends by the Liberals. One of the businesses was GC Strategies. They received $20 million. This is a company composed of 2 people working out of a basement. They even admit that they didn't do any of the work themselves. Instead, they subcontracted it out. What the Auditor General's report, showed further was that 76% of those that received contracts didn't actually do any work on the app. So it means that there was this payout for them, but they didn't actually contribute to its creation. So we have to ask the question, what happened here? I mean, this is a massive boondoggle, and this is a whole lot of Canadian taxpayer money that is being handed out to Liberal insiders. It's wrong, and there does need to be great accountability. And so as Conservatives, we're insisting on that. And so we continue to apply pressure both at committee and in the House of Commons on a daily basis.
Now I want to talk to Rachel Thomas, the Shadow Minister for Canadian Heritage. Now, you also posted on social media how the Liberals need to be held to account by not spending so many tax dollars on those flashy business class seats as they travel to explore Canadian culture. Can you explain in more detail?
Sure. At Heritage Committee, there was discussion around whether or not we should travel for committee. And the Liberal members were quite keen that we should travel. And the chair of the committee, Hetty Fry from Vancouver, offered that the reason we should spend this money on traveling across Canada was to hear from those that she referred to as, quote, Joe Schmo. She went on to explain that this travel was necessary so that we listen to regular Canadians, because in Ottawa, in her mind, we didn't take that opportunity. What I find interesting about this is, look, as elected officials, we have every opportunity to listen to regular Canadians. That's what we should be doing every single day that we are in our ridings. That is our job. That is what we are elected for. And so we don't need to spend tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars on business class tickets to travel across the country to do that. We just need to put our boots on the ground in our ridings and actually do the work we were elected to do. Certainly as the local member of Parliament for Lethbridge, that's what I'm committed to. So I'll continue to be here and be present and listen to those that are, in this community. And my hope would be that my Liberal colleagues would hopefully do the same.
Lethbridge Conservative MP and Shadow Minister for Canadian Heritage, Rachel Thomas, thanks for your time today.
Thanks, Hal. Nice to be with you.
On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless and thanks for watching.